It is Thursday, June 4th, still the off season, but less than 100 days to go until opening kickoff of the 2015 NFL season. This is Real in the Field Goals. I'm your host, Kenneth Arthur, and I'm a co-host, you could say. My other co-host, Danny Kelly. How are you?
I'm doing well, Kenny. How are you?
I'm good. I just want to say people have been asking about the opening theme song. If you're listening to the iTunes version of this, you did hear the theme song, and that's David Fagerholm. He submitted that one, and people are loving it. It's great. What do you think, Danny?
Yeah, I think it's awesome. Starting to people definitely, have tweeted at me and wrote written comments saying they really like it. So I'm really pumped.
And he had told me that he had not done music in a long time. Like it was just, oh, this will be a good opportunity to do music, and I think that's why there's a lot of either there are a ton of good musicians out there, or there's just 1,000 of them, but maybe only 5 are getting paid for it. Because I swear people
like
have come
football
up with,
writing.
yeah, exactly. Not a lot of people getting paid for football writing either, or for doing this podcast. Our guest this week is Ben Muth, former tackle at Stanford, current writer of offensive line analyzation and such for Football Outsiders. Ben, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Because especially at this time, the Seahawks, there's a lot of good things to talk about with the Seahawks, and a couple bad things maybe, but one thing that people seem to be focused on a lot is the offensive line, which, had its peaks, it seemed like, and then now maybe is in a valley. Some major changes around the offensive line. Can you talk a little bit about, one of the hardest things to do for any fan is to know for sure how good offensive lines are just from watching games, because it can get masked a lot in, say, quarterback sacks or rushing yards, which only tell a small piece of the tale. So would you talk a little bit about the Seahawks offensive line? How do you think they did last year, and what do you think of their transition in the offseason this year?
Yeah, I think when you said up and down, that's a pretty good description of, the unit last year and kind of, the unit as a whole. I think, obviously with Unger leaving, I think that's probably, the biggest issue up front, and maybe for you guys as a team. I was a huge Unger guy. He had some health issues, but as far as centers go, when he was in there and healthy, I think you guys' ups oftentimes coincided with that, because he's one of those guys that's a real difference maker. Not just because he does his job, but he allows you to do some things schematically that I think help some of the other guys out.
Mm-hmm.
Okung, Seahawks were one of the teams I focused on for my column a couple years ago. I think it was Okung's second year, and I really liked what I saw. He was a guy that I thought was gonna take a step up and be top 5 type tackle, and I don't know. It seems like he's never really put together 16 games or even more than one season at a time and been a really dominant guy. He's been good at times. He's been great at shorter times, and then there's been some. It really hasn't come together. Thought it would early in his career. Sweezy, is the other guy that. He's tough to get a read on, because the stuff he does well you love, and he's a guy that was a D lineman in college, so he made the move, and you keep waiting for him to kind of become a little bit more consistent. But last year the stuff he flashed was like we were talking about, Unger's one of the few guys on an offensive line that I think can be a difference maker, for schematically as well as individually. I think Sweezy does some stuff for you where if he can, start to be a little bit more consistent, you can count on him to do that stuff more frequently. He can be that kind of difference maker. Losing Carpenter, Carpenter was kind of just a guy. He was fine. I don't think, you should be able to replace James Carpenter. If you can't replace a James Carpenter, you gotta look to the front office probably. You might take a step back initially, but I don't think he's a deal breaker. Is the plan to have Bailey slide into his spot?
That's how it's looking. Yeah.
Yeah, the right tackle spot was. Oh, is he down 30 pounds?
Yeah, that's what they said.
Good.
He's around 320 now, as opposed to 350 last year.
Yeah. Although, I mean, heck, if you were gonna, usually guys don't drop 30 pounds when they move inside, but he could probably stand to lose it. But yeah, the right tackle spot was an issue for you guys obviously last year with Britt. I mean, he was a rookie. He did some good things in the running game. I'm not sure. I'm not sure he was ready to come in and start, just from a passing game perspective. But I think with rookies, it's really hard to tell when they play early when they're not great or terrible because everyone's kind of there's so many guys that just kind of are in that below average NFL starter as a rookie, and then a lot of guys get a lot better, a lot of guys get a lot never get better, and then they're out of the league in 4 years. So it's tough to project that. And
Oh, yeah,
what's
go
that?
ahead.
No, you go ahead.
What would you say about because it seems like there's a lot of sort of guys that should be doing a lot better, but the Seahawks, a first-round pick on Okung, a first-round pick on Carpenter, a second-round pick on Britt. It's not for lack of trying. So would you say that they're doing sort of what Tom Cable wants them to do, or would you saying that the Seahawks front office just isn't doing a very good job of talent evaluation in the draft?
I don't. It's without being in the room or watching from afar. Yeah, I mean, there's an issue in that guys that they've drafted high, haven't really panned out the way you would want them to. Like Okung you're fine with him as your left tackle, but if he's the guy that you spend the top 5 pick on, he's probably not where you want him to be. Justin Britt, he's a second-round guy who played a lot last year, who did some good things, did some bad things. I think it's probably a little too early to tell on him. And Carpenter, Carpenter was a miss. I think I really liked him coming out of college. I remember. I thought, as a run blocker, he was just going to come in right away and get things done. I thought him coming from Alabama was going to be, I thought, he played for Saban. That offensive line coach is really well regarded. I think he's in Philly now, so he's gonna be NFL ready, even if he's not a great athlete. I thought, he did some other stuff that was just going to translate immediately, and for whatever reason, it didn't. I'm not sure. One thing that seems to be a problem with some of these Alabama guys is that all of them are such good college players that as a unit, they're really dominant. So, they work a lot of. Obviously, on an offensive line, you're going to work a lot of combination blocks. If you and the guy you're playing next to are both, really good college players, I think, it might, you guys, it makes everyone look a little better than they are.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, there's just some stuff where maybe they're not used to, they're used to, all right, we can knock this, me and Chance Warmaker playing next to each other, we're going to knock this D tackle back 3 yards and come off on the linebacker. Well, now all of a sudden you're a rookie, so you're not as good as a player as you were in college, obviously. The guy you are playing next to is not as good as Chance Warmack was in college, and you're not getting that initial movement off the line, and I'm not sure if they just for whatever reason, have a hard time adjusting to, the angles that it's going to take now that you're not knocking guys off the ball as much. But for whatever reason, it seems like every Alabama guy the last 5 or 6 years has been, there's been an adjustment period, and has been a little underwhelming, to be honest, considering, how good a lot of the, considering they're coming from a pro system, it hasn't been there. So as far as, your question about the Seahawks guys in particular, I think it's tough to evaluate a lineman nowadays. I think obviously that's something Tom Cable has groused about. And, I think the Seahawks, it's like, it's just tough. I think they've hit on a lot of other positions, but they've had 3 guys that they've taken early that haven't panned out, but all it takes is, for their next 2 guys they take early to pan out, and it's like, oh, they're great at drafting a lineman. So it's a little bit of small sample size, but yeah, I really don't know if it's Cable or the front office.
I have a question. This is kind of just general, but one of the things that the Seahawk fans constantly argue about is how good is the Seahawks offensive line. And on one hand, you have, they led the league in rushing by like 25 yards over the second place team in Dallas. And so, like, on one hand you want to say, well, obviously they're doing something right if they lead the league in rushing by like a country mile. And then at the same time, obviously, they've kind of had the issues with pressure and with sacks, and just generally speaking, Russell Wilson's been the highest pressured quarterback over the last couple of years. In your experience, how hard is it and how different is it to protect for a mobile quarterback, someone like Russell Wilson?
So, I don't think it's harder to protect for mobile quarterbacks versus pocket passers. It's harder to protect for guys that hold on to the ball.
Yeah.
And mobile quarterbacks will tend to do that a little more. And here's one thing that I actually like about mobile quarterbacks, especially if you guys run the if teams run the read option like you guys do, is DNs against the read option team in shotgun, aren't looking, all right, I got to get off the ball immediately and get 4 yards downfield, because they know the Seahawks run a lot from shotgun.
Right.
They often leave that DN unblocked for the quarterback to read, so it slows them down. So I always thought as a tackle, if you were running the read option, that made pass protection a lot easier. Just in general, it just slows those guys down, gives them something to think about.
Yeah.
As far as the Seahawks' success running the ball, obviously Marshawn Lynch is great, and people can say that, oh, well, wasn't that great until he got to Seattle. I think that's a big part of it. But, just as big, I think Russell Wilson, like that mobile quarterback it's a real difference maker on pretty much every, any running play you want, even if you're not in the shotgun, just, him handing on an outside zone and the threat that he can boot out.
Right.
It always gives that defense something to think about. It makes everyone a half step slow and just makes everything so much easier. So, I think, I think the offensive line is okay. I mean, obviously you guys run the ball well, but, compared to where the rest of the team is, I could see why fans might think it's lagging behind a little bit about what you guys are doing everywhere else.
As a former offensive lineman yourself at college, and do you get somewhat offended if the Seahawks almost seem to feel sort of blasé about replacing Carpenter and Unger, that they sort of feel like they didn't even, even the guys that they draft, some of them don't even play offensive line, and then they just say, we're going to stick you in there because you got the body for it. And like you were saying earlier, sometimes about how hard it is to evaluate, especially at the college level, with these guys running different systems or playing next to players that will affect them dramatically. And what Tom Cable had said in the past about, well, look, college guys are taught so many wrong techniques that you have to start from scratch, whether they're a defensive lineman or an offensive lineman. So would you agree with that? Do you think the Seahawks are going to find themselves regretting sort of this strategy?
Well, I certainly don't take offense to people thinking O-linemen are replaceable, because, I mean, for the most part, I think the Unger thing is Unger's it's gonna be hard to replace Max Unger, but you got Jimmy Graham. Like, I don't think think that was them thinking, oh, well, we can just plug a guy into Max Unger. It was, shit, we can get Jimmy Graham. So I think it was more that. And as far as James Carpenter, like I said earlier, I think he should be able to replace kind of a, league average guard, maybe a tick below. Those guys are out there. As far as, Cable's comments about, guys coming in being taught the wrong stuff, I'm not sure that colleges are teaching these guys the wrong things. I think there's a lot of good coaches in college football. I think it's more that, when you got a guy that is playing well for you, and maybe he's not doing everything perfectly technique-wise, but he's an all-conference level performer, or he's a strong guy. As a college offensive line coach, you got to figure out, do I harp on him to make sure his hand placement's perfect, or do I get this redshirt freshman that's starting at right tackle? Do I try to get him, up to a level where he's not going to get our quarterback killed? So I think a little bit of just college coaches are a little more content to let some little things go if the guy's producing, because they only have so many hours. They gotta focus on what's going to help them win games. The D lineman thing, I think it's interesting. I think one thing that me and a buddy of mine that works for a front office in the NFL, we talk about is how colleges are playing a lot more defensive linemen now than they used to. Just everyone's rotating D linemen all the time, both college and pro. High school's doing it. So there's a lot less kids that would have gotten moved to the O-line maybe in high school, maybe in college earlier, because they're playing, as even if it's second string, they're still getting enough snaps, and they're not maybe necessarily as willing to move in college. So I think there's less really good athletes on the offensive line than there used to be. I think a lot of those guys are sticking with defense longer because, like I said, because they're playing. So I think that's one thing to think about. And so if he thinks, you got to go where you can get the NFL athletes. You can't want your way to being a good NFL player, despite what the media will tell you. You got to have a certain level of athleticism.
But I really want it. Can I please be an NFL player?
Yeah, exactly.
I just want the paycheck and the glory, but I don't actually want to practice. So sign me up.
Exactly. So if he's finding those guys, the kind of guys that he thinks are going to be good NFL offensive linemen, A, we're playing defense in college, and B, are going to be available a little bit later because it's going to take a position move. I think that's a pretty smart move. I think I might caution on taking too many of those guys because then it just, you got to do so much teaching all the time, and it's the NFL and there's unlimited time. But I don't think I'd want 4 of those guys on my roster when I can only carry 8 offensive linemen. But I think bringing in 1 or 2 a year in mini camps and seeing which ones stick, I think that's a pretty sound strategy.
2-part question for you, and it kind of relates to what you're talking about in terms of techniques and things like that. First off, are you fairly familiar with the brand of zone blocking scheme that Tom Cable runs? And if so, could you kind of explain how you would characterize it?
I was at Stanford when he was in Oakland, so our coaching staffs would work together a lot. So, I'm familiar with a lot of his outside zone stuff because that they ran a lot of that back in Oakland, and I think it's solid. It's similar to what Gibbs ran. There's always a little bit of wrinkles here and there.
Could you kind of explain that a little bit to the lay person, just from your point of view?
Yeah, I guess I think the biggest principle of it's stretch and cut. So you want to get guys moving on the front side, particularly on the edge. You want that D end to widen, as much as you can. So it's the threat to hook them, and because teams have been running it now for 20 years since the Broncos did it in the mid-'90s, defensive ends are better about setting the edge. And when they do that, you got to be able to hook them and get outside once or twice a game to keep them honest. But really, even though the back's aiming point is that defensive end, he almost always wants to cut that back. So you're trying to get that guy wide. You're going to want to. The place you really need to win is the play side defensive tackle, whether it's a 3 technique or a nose. The nice thing about Unger is that he was able to reach those shaded nose tackles by himself without any help, and that lets your guards get up on the linebackers or help out with the D end if that's what they want to do. So if your center can't do that, he's got to lay back a little bit, and the guard has to lay back a little bit to help the center, and that can kind of muck it up. But if you can win on that deep play side defensive tackle, if he's a 3 technique, the guard's got to be able to hook him and do well, at least cover him all the way up. Or if he's a 1 technique, you got to have a center that's able to reach him. And then that's really the guy that the back ends up reading, because he'll take a quick look at the D end. Unless he slants inside or gets hooked right away, he's thinking, all right, this is going between the tackles, and then he's looking to that play side tackle, or that play side defensive tackle, to see is he going to go play side or if he's going to have to go all the way back. And on the back side, you're basically just trying to cut everyone down, and create running lanes that way.
Do you have any thoughts on the sort of controversy that's around cut blocking and whether the NFL might outlaw it eventually?
I hope they don't. It's really hard to play offensive line these days. There's just A, the guys on defense are more athletic. B, they sub all the time. So if you're a left tackle, you got to be able to block a 300-pound defensive end on first and second down, and then watch as a 230-pound nickel rusher comes in on 3rd and long, and you're not subbing out. You got to be the guy that can do all that. And part of the things that can help you out is you can cut block guys. You can keep them honest. They can't just charge right into you. 80 plays a game. So I hope they don't outlaw it. I don't think now that they've really done a good job about diving in the back of people's knees, they enforce posts and chops much more. I don't think there's that many injuries. They put the penalty, or they enforce the penalty about coming back into the line of scrimmage to cut guys. I think it would make it really hard to play offensive line if they outlaw cut blocking.
Yeah, and it would pretty much wouldn't it be way more of a detriment to zone blocking teams in general?
Yeah. If you're going to run the outside zone and you can't cut block, and there's teams that don't do a ton of cut blocking on the outside zone, they just try to reach those guys. But I don't want to say it will kill the play, but I don't think anyone's going to major an outside zone like you see teams do now. I think it'll become more of a change of pace play if they outlaw cut blocks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just in general, right now, looking around the league, who has the best offensive line? Which team do you like to watch? As an offensive lineman, I'm sure you get really frustrated with bad offensive line play and dumb mistakes that maybe even most people would not even see, and then really paying attention to those guys that can get down the field and pull off blocks. And Which teams did you really enjoy watching last season, and which one was like just really brutal to watch?
Teams I really enjoyed last season. I think the Ravens were. I really liked what they did. They actually they ran an outside zone scheme, and personally I prefer that over gap schemes just because I don't know, I think it's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing when you see that stretch, and it seems like it's a violent cut block, but or cut back, but it's really it's really just right in that play side B gap. It just looks that way, and I think that's really pretty to watch. And the Ravens were great. Yanda,
they got Yanda and Osemele are both free agents next year, so they got a huge decision there to make with their guards because Yanda is older but is arguably the best offensive lineman, at least the best guard in the NFL, and then Osemele is younger and still really, really good. Do you think that is there any way you see Yanda becoming a free agent, signing somewhere else next year?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough for them to bring them both back just because, I think those guys might be two of the top 5 guards in the NFL. It's similar to what happened with the Saints when they had Evans and Nix, where they had these two guys, and it's hard to invest that much money in your guards, to what? They're probably each going to get over 10 a year. Like, it's hard to invest $22 million in your salary cap on your left and right guard.
Not many teams do that.
I could see, yeah. I can see where they're going to have to let one go. I don't know. I think, I watched a lot of the Ravens last year, and I think Yanda's the better player for sure. But, 2 years from now, I'm not going to be as sure. So I think that's something that they're going to definitely have to take a hard look at.
Former Seahawk Justin Forsett, you saw a lot of him, and I think he had the most yards before contact last year, which would speak to the offensive line. Is there any chance that he's going to follow it up with another good year from what you saw?
Yeah, I've always been a Forsett guy. Ever since he put it to us a couple times when he was at Cal and I was at Stanford, and I've always thought he was good. And when he was in Seattle, I always thought he played pretty well when he got chances, but for whatever reason, no one ever said, oh, well, Justin Forsett's our guy. And, even last year it took the Ray Rice incident and Bernard Pierce just really missing some big holes before he got a chance in Baltimore. And, obviously that offensive line is great. I just said it was the best in the NFL, but, I think Forsett is I think he's good enough to, maybe if it's not as good, I know I'd be surprised if he's under, 1,300 yards this year.
Do you think it makes a big difference this is kind of off Seahawks topic, obviously, but with Mark Trestman coming in as their offensive coordinator, obviously Gary Kubiak is along with Tom Cable, one of the top, I guess, disciples of the Gibbs zone blocking game. Does it make a big difference with Mark Trestman coming in? Do you think they'll kind of change things up or continue on?
Hold on a second. I gotta sneeze. Is there? I'm gonna mute myself real quick.
Go for it. So right now Ben is sneezing, and this is me commentating over that silence.
All right, I'm back.
And he's back, everybody.
There it is. Yeah, it could make a huge difference. I think. Yeah. Hopefully, I think their offensive line coach is back, and I know Kubiak really got their running game going last year when he came in as the OC, and hopefully, Trestman is smart enough to just say, hey, you guys had a great running game last year. How can I integrate what I want to do in the passing game to what you did in the running game? Because when you get a running game going like that, especially in today's NFL where there's not a lot of teams that were as good as they were last year, it's easy. I think you can find ways to integrate your passing game to it. So I'm really hoping that he doesn't tinker with it too much.
And along those lines, obviously I started kind of talking to you about Tom Cable's brand of zone blocking. Mm-hmm. I know that obviously the Seahawks do a lot more read option than most teams. Is there a big difference between that of what Kubiak kind of has run with over the years and what Cable does, or are they pretty much based on the same principles?
I think they're very similar for the 5 guys up front. From what I've seen of the Seahawks, it seems their personnel groupings and their formations are different, and so that can affect running back fit, or whether or not it's you're going straight eye, what you're getting from your non-5 offensive linemen, what they're going to be able to do for you. Okay. But just the fits for the 5 down guys, their combinations. I mean, they look. I'm not sure what they're teaching in the room, but on film they look very similar.
You talked about how you played against Justin Forsett, which reminds me that obviously I would assume if your career ended in 2007, I believe that's when Marshawn Lynch's career ended, so you must have played against him a lot while you were at Stanford. I mean, and especially being right there in the same area, can you does it surprise you to see he's had as much success as he's had, and what do you think makes Marshawn Lynch, especially over these last 3 years when he's really got going? Because a lot of people, they talked about, like the read option and whatnot, but also the presence of Russell Wilson and how everything has changed in these last 2 years. What makes Marshawn Lynch so much better now, even when he was good in Buffalo? What is he doing differently that's better now that he's, arguably getting into the Hall of Fame conversation?
Yeah, it's funny. I think Marshawn was a year older than me and left a year or two before me. But when I was redshirting the first time we played him, or he would have been a true freshman. Yeah. So, and he was a big guy, but he was not a power runner. He was kind of an explosive player. At least he played that way against us. And he got bigger as he got older in college, and I think it just took him a while to really find what was going to work best for him as an NFL player. I think he's gotten more physical as the years have gone on. I think he's gotten more patient, but also a little more conservative. I think he's kind of it's weird that he's a power runner that kind of almost picks his way through the line of scrimmage initially. Like usually power runners, you think, just hammering the line of scrimmage and falling forward and, get into open space and then exploding. But like you watch him a lot of times on some of these inside runs and, he's almost, side shuffling through the line, and then all of a sudden he'll, hit that linebacker and just explode on contact, and then, he'll either drag that guy for a couple yards or, break that tackle, and then, then he's throwing Patrick Peterson 40 feet, to the side. But I think he became a little bit more patient as a runner, and he's got a unique style. I don't know, like I said, you don't see a lot of power runners that are so kind of picky and nifty, just laterally. It's just I really like watching him play. He's a stud, man.
Yeah, I think that's why whenever anyone compares someone to Marshawn Lynch, I'm always just like, well, like what part are you comparing him to? Because he like you said, he's kind of unique in the fact that he's a little bit of a blend between a finesse like space runner who can make people miss in space, and then obviously a dude who can run you over. We talked about it a little bit. As long as we're talking about your college football days, we talked about it a little bit before we got online live here. You've obviously played for Jim Harbaugh at Stanford, and we were talking about how he seems a little bit happier now. What's your take on his kind of decision to go to Michigan and all that?
Yeah, I think Coach Harbaugh's happy coaching football. Anytime he's around it, that's what he wants to do. But the whole with how aggressive he's been on social media and how much he's gotten his face out there, it seems like. I think there is a component of when your girlfriend breaks up with you and you want to post on Facebook like, oh, look at this sweet trip I took, and out with the boys, and
look how happy I am.
Yeah, I think there's a little component of that. I mean, there's no way Coach Harbaugh was happy to be let go from the 49ers. I think he accepted it, and I think he's excited to be at Michigan, but he's not the kind of guy that it's like, oh, I got fired, great, this is the best thing that could have happened to me. I think I don't think that sat well with him.
How would you describe his coaching style while you played for him? Was he a very micromanaged, close to everything, or sort of overseeing everything? Because obviously, I mean, from the time that you were there to by the time that obviously I think Andrew Luck and then Harbaugh leaving, but he really turned that program around. So how would you describe the what you had seen from the previous coach to Harbaugh, how his style?
Yeah, so he's very detail oriented, very very intense. I think so. He's hands on in that respect, but I think he also was really good about giving his assistants a lot of leeway with what I'm not sure if he's still that way. Some coaches get a little bit more and more hands-on as they go, but I know, for offensive, in our offensive line meeting room, our O-line coach was the guy that was, he was calling the shots. The type of running game we had, that was his baby. And what formations we could get away with, that was his deal. And Harbaugh, would give his assistants a lot of leeway there. He would always have suggestions. He would always say, "Hey, coach, what if we did this?" But I told coach, I've seen coaches tell him now that's not going to work, and he's like, "All right, just a thought." It's funny that the detail-orientedness really comes almost obsessive with certain things, and it can be random stuff, and it's stuff that you probably a lot of times I didn't see why it was important, but a lot of times it was important, and him being obsessed about it, I think, did make a difference. There were times when it wasn't important, even in hindsight, but you got to take that too. So I could see where he would grind on guys, because the stuff he does really focus on can be a little random. But I mean, he's a great football coach, and I love playing for him. He was, there's not a lot of people that I learned more from, obviously from a football standpoint, but just how to work. Whether it's football or class or now I'm in the professional world, like he's great at teaching you some habits that'll let you work.
Right.
So.
What do you take in terms of the transition from Harbaugh down to Tom Sula? Kind of what's your opinion on how the 49ers are going to adjust to that, and what do you sort of, I guess not predict, but what sort of thing what do you think they're going to do in terms of how they react to that?
I think it's really been a bad time to get rid of a coach like Harbaugh for the Niners, just because they had a real veteran team, and I think if Willis would have stayed, if Smith would have stayed, if their core really wouldn't have ended up leaving, I think moving from Harbaugh to Tom Sula could have given them a slight uptick in the this year, and helped them out maybe, just because when you've been ground on for so long, it can be a nice little breath of fresh air to get a players coach in there.
Yeah.
And but with a young team where it's going to be a lot of guys, and obviously I don't know Tom Sula. I've just seeing interviews and kind of knowing his resume, that he's never really been a coordinator or anything like that. I'm not sure that he's the best guy for a large organizational transition. He seemed like he would have been like Larry Coker, I guess, is like the best caretaker example, where you got a good team and you maybe need a guy that can let loose the reins because this team knows what to do. But the fact that the 49ers lost so much, I wouldn't be surprised if that team took a step back.
Do you think maybe they're not trying to win? Like they're almost punting this season to say, well, we've got so many things to rebuild now. I'm sure they had some inclination of who could be leaving. So do you think that Tom Sula was sort of like well, if we have to fire this guy in 1 year, nobody's going to care because he's not a notable name?
I mean, that's a possibility. I'd like to think that organizations aren't that diabolical, frankly, where they're like, we're probably not going to be great. So
I mean, it worked for the Seahawks.
Yeah.
Mora. I don't know necessarily if they thought he was going to be around for 1 year, but obviously that it was easier maybe to let him go. But
I completely blacked out the Jim Mora era Seahawks.
We all did. I think we were literally just all blacked out.
He was a coach here? I forgot.
Yeah, I remember his Atlanta days. I remember that he was always rumored to go there because of some ties he had up there. Oh no, it was Washington that he was always rumored to go to. But right. I'd completely forgotten that he coached the Seahawks.
What do you think of, just speaking around the NFC West, we've talked about the Seahawks and the 49ers. I think you've got some good insight into what you think maybe of the Rams or the Cardinals. The Cardinals, obviously, they signed Mike Iupati. They have Cooper. Hopefully they're hoping he still pans out. They spent a 7th overall pick on him. Jared Valdir looks like he was a good pickup. The Cardinals, but they've been the worst running team in the NFL, it seems like, for decades. And then you've got the Rams.
Longer.
You got the Rams who, they tried with Jake Long. That didn't work out. They drafted Greg Robinson 2nd overall. These are teams that are trying really hard to do good offensive lines. Are either one of them going to have that next year?
Man, I hope the Cardinals do. I think Iupati's a big upgrade. I'm a fan of his. I think he had a down year last year, but I think that was that offensive line in general just wasn't looking great. And Boone held out. Davis got hurt. There's obviously anytime the coach is. I mean, things weren't good on that team last year. Alex Boone is ripping the coach as soon as he leaves town, and it's so I think that can affect a guy like Iupati who I think when I've seen him play, he's great at times. He kind of reminds me of J.R. Sweezy, but man, when he's on, you look at him like that guy's the best guard in football. Not as consistent as you would like. He's been more when he was good, he was more consistent than Sweezy was last year. But I'm not sure if he was the most motivated guy to begin with. And so when things kind of got shaky behind the scenes, I think he was one of the guys that really let it affect him. But other than that, we got Veldier and him. Cooper just, we're 2 years in, and I know he had the injury the first year, but man, I mean, he was playing behind a guy that was, a journeyman. I can't think of his name right now. I'm spacing. I'm a Cardinals fan too. This is.
Was it Faneca? Paul Faneca or whatever?
Faneca played a little bit, but I'm thinking of a different guy who played some snaps that was just ahead of Cooper, and just like if this guy's playing ahead of him, on one hand I respected Arians playing who he thought was the best player, because a lot of teams will just play the high draft pick and save face a little bit, and Arians and his staff didn't do that, which you got to give him credit for. But man, it does not speak well for Jonathan Cooper.
Ted Larson?
Pretty hard.
Larson, yes, Larson. Thank you.
There it is.
I think he's still there, and
he is.
It's so hard to draft a guard in the first round, let alone the top 10, and have them not be good. I mean, it's so rare to go in the first round that it seems like it's still possible, of course, that Cooper could be bad, but yeah, it speaks a lot to say that any first round guard wouldn't be able to grab a starting job.
Yeah, and then as far as the Rams go, I think actually Greg Robinson is the poster boy for what Cable was talking about college guys not it's hard to evaluate him because like he was taken second overall, and I watched a lot of them in college, so because we ended up doing a piece on him on Football Outsiders, and I had no idea if he could pass block, like just because of the offense that Auburn ran, how much they ran the ball, the type of protection schemes they used when they did throw the ball, just Greg Robinson's general technique when pass blocking, like it was a flip of the coin whether this guy was ever going to be an NFL caliber pass blocker. And he got taken second overall because he was a great athlete and a hell of a run blocker. He actually ended up playing a little bit better than I thought as a rookie, and I know a lot of people were disappointed because he wasn't that good as the number 2 overall pick. But if you watched him in college, I thought from a technique standpoint he came far enough to be very encouraged. I like Saffold if he can stay healthy. Barksdale is gone, Davin Joseph. The Rams are one of the teams I covered last year, and Davin Joseph for the Rams last year was about as bad as an NFL player who started a lot of games. You'll see, he was terrible, and I think he's not going to start this year, so that's going to be an improvement. So yeah, I think the Rams have a shot if Robinson takes a big step up, but heck, we've been talking about how the Seahawks might have a little bit of an underwhelming O-line compared to the rest of their team, but there's a decent chance they're still going to have the best O-line in the conference. So,
wow, love to hear that.
There's that to look forward to. Yeah.
Just from a technique standpoint, one of the things we like to do at Field Goals is talk about the more in-depth stuff. Could you kind of give some, you were talking about how Greg Robinson in college didn't have some of the techniques in pass pro that you need in the NFL. Can you talk a little bit about some of the specific things that you saw him doing or not doing?
Yeah, he had a hard time with wide rushers, in particular. He would take like a lot of false steps. So his first step, with his outside leg to start getting depth to meet that guy back, he'd pretty much step right underneath himself. And then so when he brought his right foot back, his feet got too close together. He would lean on guys a lot at the end, so he'd get thrown forward. He ducked his head. It was weird because there just weren't a lot of good snaps of him where it's like, all right, it's 3rd and 8. Defense knows he's pass blocking. He knows he's pass blocking because Auburn's offense was so good. A and B, they they would run the ball on 3rd and 6 all the time. So even if they did throw the ball, teams weren't playing it like it was a true passing situation. So he just didn't seem to have a lot of reps. It's like, all right, it's 3rd and 11. It's time to go pass block that guy. So as a result, like, you saw stuff, and it's like, oh, that's. I mean, he was getting by because he was such a great athlete, but it wasn't pretty.
He grimace. So let's move to the defense a little bit. Obviously your experience in college, and then you were with the San Diego for a little while. I guess talking about Michael Bennett in terms of the type of player he is. What makes Michael Bennett so difficult to pass block against?
So I think the biggest thing with Michael Bennett, he's a very good pass rusher. But what's most impressive about him is that you can line him up on 1st and 2nd down at the end, and he is just, I mean, he's big and strong and physical, and he's just a bitch to run block on 1st and 2nd down. As like those types of guys, what he's pushing 300 pounds, or what is he, like 280?
Yeah, I think he's like 280, 85 maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big defensive end. And then, usually those guys can't pass rush a lick from the outside, and he is, he's not Von Miller, but if you played him at DN and only DN, he'll get you double-digit sacks, and he does it. He's got a good get off. He's active, man. He's active. A lot of guys when you see him throw a lot of moves with their hands, they lose a lot of their power moving forward. He's able to throw moves and kind of push you back at the same time. J.J. Watt's another guy like that, where they're just so strong that even if they're not like straight bull rushing you, they're able to push you back somehow. So I think that's where he gets a lot of his pressures from the edge, and then inside, it is more of the moves where he's active and his hands are so quick that he's I know you just re-signed last year and he's still underpaid. He's a stud.
Just also on the other end, I know a lot of people, they want to focus, I mean, for good reason, on the final play of the Super Bowl, which, whatever you want to call it, good or bad, the biggest play in Super Bowl history probably, just in the fact that, it was right there. But that whole second half, the whole thing is the Seahawks went into the fourth quarter with a 10-point lead, and a big thing was losing Cliff Averill in the middle of the game. Do you recall anything sort of in the second half, like why the Patriots were able to come back and win that game, or why the Seahawks weren't? It's amazing almost that the Seahawks were 1 yard away from winning a game when they were so depleted by that point. Is there anything that you sort of recall, like, wow, they'll never be able to stop Tom Brady because, they don't have Cliff Averill? Is there anything in that sort of vein that you remember?
Yeah, it wasn't when Cliff Averill went out. It was like, man, that's it hurts because he's a great pass rusher, and he's a guy that you have to think about. Even if you can't always dedicate more resources to blocking him, you have to at least think about it. And I think losing him hurt, but I don't think when he went out, I was like, oh, that's gonna do it. And I think when you're watching the game live, the nickel got hurt. You guys' nickel got hurt early, and you're like, that's going to be tough because you can see where
mega hurt.
Yeah, that's going to be tough. And then, Averill got hurt, and it was just a bunch of little things where I don't think if any one of those injuries I would have been like, oh, well, no one can come back from that. But when you look back, all that stuff, really hurt you. And then the other thing is I thought the Patriots did a good job of, really taking what the Seahawks defense gave them, and they just do so many little dink and dunks underneath, and they gained 5-6 yards early, and
yeah, they kept stringing together those first downs.
And it's so and I guarantee you the Seahawks were like, it's so hard to just, as an NFL team, to just consistently put those 4-yard, 6-yard gains together for first downs and move down the field and score. It's just, it's really hard to sustain drives like that. And the Patriots, I mean, to all the time again, it was a weird game. I think if that game's played 10 times. I would bet on the Seahawks winning if it was a 7-game series, even giving New England game 1, I think I would bet on the Seahawks there. But it was it was a weird game.
We're on this podcast.
yeah. Know the audience.
I have a question, just in general, about Brandon Meebane. The Seahawks like to play what they call, I think, a tilt with Meebane on the center. Did you guys have to deal with that ever in your experience? And how is that different in terms of compared to like lining straight up against a guy?
Yeah, so we played. There were a couple teams that played tilts against us. USC, obviously, when Carroll was there, would play a tilt sometimes, and it really affects the center in that the guy just blunts him at an angle right at the snap. I know there's no video, but I just made a pretty impressive hand punch there in my living room. But so it can really, if he can shock the center kind of in place, it really throws off combinations with the guards where you create gaps, and it's hard for the guard to really help out the center, and it takes a special kind of guy to do it, because you've also seen guys that play tilt that that guard comes down on their hip, because he can't get his hands on that guard, and just washes them down. So it takes a guy that lets a man inside to be able to do it. But if you can do it effectively, it really hurts like play side inside zone combinations and play side outside zone. It really makes it tough on that center to out leverage them.
Just mirroring that position for a moment and going back, we've talked a lot about how good Max Unger is, but knowing that Max Unger is not there anymore, and you may not have a lot of idea of how good Patrick Lewis is or Lemuel Jean-Pierre, or maybe you do, but let's just say that they're really bad. Unger did miss 10 games last year, but without a great center, how will the Seahawks have to adjust their offensive game plan?
Yeah, I think one thing that really helps you out is Russell Wilson, in the sense that, again, backers are going to play a little bit slower with him back there. So when you had Wilson and Unger, it was great, because he could hook that nose tackle, that shade by himself, guards right up on the linebacker, and you guys are really cooking with gas. I think that slows it down a little bit, because your guards are going to have to help your center more, and that means they're going to be slower to get up to the linebackers. I don't want. Obviously, like you said, you guys still led the league in rushing last year, even with Unger missing 10 games. But I think it'd be foolish to say that losing Max Unger, and even if those guys are pretty good, I think Unger was really good, and I think you guys are going to take a step back, from a pure running game perspective. But if Graham opens up the passing game enough, because I know Doug Baldwin's not going to want to hear me say this, but it seemed like defenses didn't respect your guys' passing game as much as maybe the numbers indicated. I think they felt comfortable dedicating a lot of resources to the running game, and you guys had a very efficient passing game as a result. But if teams are still dedicating that many resources to the running game despite having Jimmy Graham out there, then I think it's a bad trade. But if Jimmy Graham can relieve some of that pressure, then just him being out there, even though he's not much of a blocker, is going to help the running game, just because teams aren't going to be able to focus on it as much. So it's just kind of a give and take, and you don't know what it's going to look like until you see it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For people listening in, kind of talking about Max Unger in the center, I wrote about this recently. Actually, is Unger was really good at. So say you're lining up, the center snapping the ball, and he has to reach and block a defensive lineman who is shaded to the play side. So Unger has to take like 2 steps and get all the way hooked around the defender that's running to the actual play side and hook him. And so that's something that he was really good at. I'll include some of the I made a couple of GIFs about that to add to this little podcast, because that's a key thing. And like you said,
one day they will be able to make the audio file for a GIF, so we can throw it to a podcast and be like, you guys hear this GIF real quick.
Yeah. So, but that makes a lot of sense in terms of I think that's a huge point in how you're talking about how the guards have to help the center a little bit more now. So that's going to be something definitely really key to watch next year.
Yeah, for my money, that if you can consistently reach that shaded nose as a center without any help, that's what separates this guy is a difference maker versus this guy's a good player.
Yeah.
And I know that's the Cowboys had a good running game last year. Frederick's really good at that. And I think that was a big reason for their success. Is Frederick was another guy that had a lot of success doing that. And losing a guy like that, it hurts because even if you don't have to, let's say your center's good enough to where your coach doesn't feel like he has to help him. Well, let's say he does it. He's 80% as good. So 2 or 3 times more a game when you try to do that, he doesn't quite get him hooked, and that nose tackle makes a tackle for a 3-yard gain. It's just it starts showing up.
Yeah. And what goes into that? Do you know really, like, is it a guy's athleticism, his footwork? Is it all kind of all the above?
Yeah, it's I think big thing is footwork. You can't waste steps if you're going to do that. I think kind of core strength is something that's a little overlooked because not only do you have to get in front of them, to cut them off at the pass, you have to be able to bow back into him, and because if you get in front of him and he just collapses you, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you are. He's just going to collapse you right into the hole. So you have to be able to kind of lean back into him, and you have to have solid enough core strength to where he's not going to collapse you into the hole once you do get leverage.
Yeah.
Okay, we spoke about the Ravens offensive line, and I talked to John Urschel earlier this year, the backup guard center.
He had a really nice little playoffs when he had to play. For a rookie, he was really impressive. But
I mean, he's an impressive guy, and he looks like he could very well get that shot in 2016 if Yanda or Osemele leave. But I also, because he's also a mathematician, and I wanted to ask him. I mean, he knows some advanced stats, and obviously Football Outsiders does all they do. Oh, not all they do. I don't want to demoralize it. I love Football Outsiders, and a lot of what they do is advanced stats. So is there a way, do you think, in the future for advanced stats and offensive linemen, to sort of have a more cohesive relationship where you can say, oh, look at, Marshall Yanda or Russell Kung or J.R. Sweezy, he'd had a good game. I can look at this number and say that he did have a good game.
Yeah. So the biggest thing with if you somehow convince all 32 NFL teams to get together and say, after every play, say, all right, this is what we ran and this is what this guy's job was, something like that, because there's always going to be that unknown. And then it's like, how do you let's take Pro Football Focus because they try to do something kind of like that. It's really hard to tell. Like, it's like, all right, so one team has Max Unger, the other team has Joe replacement level, and the Seahawks like, all right, we got Max Unger, we know he's going to be able to reach this nose tackle all the time by himself, so we're going to account for our blocking schemes to take that into effect. And so Max Unger runs an outside zone, he reaches the shaded nose, ends up being a 7-yard gain. Max Unger grades positively, great. And then Joe, replacement level. Well, we know he's not, as a coaching staff, we know he struggles with this block a little bit. So we're going to have that guard hang back, give a little hand help until he gets that reach, and then the guard's going to go up to the linebacker. And then they do that, they do it well, and gain 7 yards. And if you're grading those two guys centers, it's like, oh, they both did their job on a similar play, similar gain. But how do you, unless you are the coaching staff and that we've changed our entire game plan because we know that Max Unger can do this by himself, how do you grade that? And I think it's always going to be tough to give like just a pure number. Like, all right, I don't think there's ever going to be war for offensive linemen. I think as we get more data, I think some of the motion tracking stuff that the NBA does might be helpful, but I don't think there's ever going to be in football because it's so secretive with, hey, this is what we run and this is how we block it. And this is what we want to do, that even, it's not an outcome-driven sport where it's like, oh, he blocked this guy, he did his job. It's like, well, how hard was his job?
Yeah. Well, I'm meeting with all 32 teams tomorrow, so I'll try and bring it up.
Yeah, just get them all together and, let them know, hey, we need to know everything you run, how you block it, why you block it that way, and we're going to need to do this after every game.
No problem.
Yeah, let's get that done.
That's the hardest part about football, and I was talking about this yesterday. It's like you can't accurately talk about how good a player is like that just based on did they do their job or not?
Yeah, well, I know. I think Danny, I follow you on Twitter, and I know you posted that thing about Seahawks that are only good because they play with other Seahawks or whatever.
yeah.
Which I got a kick out of. And yeah, there probably are a couple guys that look a lot better because they play with the guys they play with on the Seahawks, but I don't know how you can tell which one's which.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
So there's probably guys. You guys have guys that are better than they are because of their teammates, and guys that are that probably are getting dragged down a little bit by their teammates. It's hard to look at like that.
Let's just put it the way that, like Peyton Manning is a great player that's going to make great players around him greater. But at the same time, he chose the Denver Broncos. I'm sure he sat down and he watched a lot of tape of Demaryius Thomas and Eric Decker, and he got an idea of the fact that he's not going to a team, like at the time, Seattle, who may have wanted him. And they didn't have guys like Demaryius Thomas. Peyton Manning, he knows just as much as anyone else that even as great as he is, he's not going to look that good if he doesn't have players that can catch the ball or get downfield or beat man coverage and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And Peyton Manning, not only does he know he needs guys that can do that, but he knows I want guys that can run these routes and can get open in this specific way. Not just guys that can get open, but I want guys that can get open in this specific way because those are the kind of throws I can make right now. So, even everyone's like, oh, look at how great Peyton Manning made everyone, but he had the chance to choose a team that he knew was going to make him look as good as possible too. I think that's a perfect point.
Yeah. Then why not end on a perfect point made by me? That's what I like to do as often as possible. So Ben, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people follow you?
Football Outsiders. I think I got the little tab with all the archive stuff on there. That's the other thing. And then at Twitter, at @FO_word of Muth. And I'm all over that.
Yeah,
all right, guys.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. Subscribe to Reel in the Field Goals on iTunes. That way you'll get the theme music and who knows what other bonuses. And then obviously go to fieldgoals.com. You can follow Danny at Field Goals. That hasn't changed, right, Danny?
That's correct.
That's still correct. And then me at Kenneth Arthur S. And then come back next week for even more of this. Bye.